After the car accident, I was trapped in the car with my boyfriend's first love. My boyfriend rescued her first. In the ambulance, he explained, she's pregnant. It's 2 lives. Oh, he didn't know that I was pregnant too. I don't want the child that I was willing to risk my life to give birth to anymore. When I woke up, the ward was empty. My throat was dry and hoarse, and I couldn't make a sound. The whole hospital was terribly quiet. I got out of bed and stood blankly in the corridor. They were chatting animatedly and didn't notice my presence. What was Blake whispering that made Luna laugh like that? The lights were blindingly bright. I thought that, more or less, I would see him sitting by my bedside, asking for my forgiveness. But no. He just left me, who was in a coma, in the hospital and went for a stroll with his first love. Suddenly, I felt a bit dazed. Was the person who was carefully helping Luna really Blake? If it was my Blake, why would he treat me like this? Blake saw me. He looked both flustered and panicked. He walked up to me, like a child who had done something wrong. He had always been so composed and had never shown such an expression before. How strange that he moved his lips and finally just asked, "The floor is so cold. Why aren't you wearing shoes?" I forgot. I was so afraid of being abandoned that I wanted to find him as soon as I woke up. I didn't say anything and just looked at him quietly. His eyebrows furrowed more and more tightly. There was an eerie silence in the atmosphere. Luna explained, "I wanted to drink preserved egg and lean pork congee. Blake didn't feel at ease letting me go downstairs to buy it alone, so, was she showing off something?" Luna's eyes were red, as if she had been crying. I was the one who was left behind. Why was she crying? I ignored her and just stretched out my hands towards Blake. "I'm tired." He picked me up horizontally. His movements were gentle, as if he was holding an expensive and fragile porcelain. I looked up at him. Everything about him was as wonderful as when we first met. But I couldn't be like that anymore. I was dying. Luna poured me a glass of water. I didn't want to drink it. She saw my discomfort and was surprisingly understanding. "You two talk first. I'll go downstairs and take a walk." Blake turned to look at her, hesitant to speak. I knew that he was worried about her being alone. She was 7 months pregnant. It was inconvenient for her to move around. Even a fall would be disastrous. I said softly, "Go and accompany her. I'll be fine." In the end, Blake didn't leave. He was feeling guilty. How could he not feel guilty? I almost died in front of him. "Are you hungry? Have something to eat first." Blake knew that I didn't like congee, so he brought me rice noodle rolls, but he forgot. I don't eat coriander. As soon as I smelled it, I felt sick physically. When I first returned to the Xing family, I behaved very well. To please my biological parents, I would do anything and eat anything. Except coriander. My parents firmly believed that I was being fussy. A child who grew up in the mountains couldn't be so picky, so they always forced me to eat it. They didn't know that every time after eating, I would feel nauseous for a long time. Later, when I behaved better and treated coriander the same as other dishes, they stopped forcing me. Only then did I realize that they didn't like coriander either. It turned out that not every meal at home had to have coriander. When I grew up and left home, I had the right to decide what to eat for each meal. I never ate coriander again until Luna came. Luna had a poor appetite and ate very little. But she liked coriander. As long as there was some coriander in the dishes, she could eat a bit more. I couldn't be harsh on a pregnant woman, could I? So there were always a few dishes on the table that she could eat. I made them, suppressing my nausea. Blake was a bit annoyed. I didn't know that the rice noodle rolls at that place would have coriander in them. "I'll go and buy another portion." "Blake, I'm not that fussy." What was the point of being fussy anymore? In his heart, I had never been the first priority. I had never been put first by anyone. Blake was silent and helped me pick out all the coriander from the rice noodle rolls. I took a couple of bites, and my stomach churned. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. My mouth tasted sour and bitter. Blake handed me a bottle of water. He sighed, "Bonnie, it's my fault. You don't have to feel aggrieved." Oh, right, he still didn't know that I was pregnant too. Blake went downstairs to buy rice noodle rolls for me. He wasn't the kind of person who showed his emotions easily. He had always been calm and self-possessed. Of course, he wouldn't really kneel down to beg for my forgiveness. He knew that I was still angry. So he was trying to soften me up step by step. He was wrong. I wasn't angry. I had given up hope. I gave up hope the moment he rushed towards Luna. The car accident happened on the way to the hospital. This morning, we took Luna to have a prenatal checkup. It was snowing, and the car skidded and overturned. Blake climbed out first. He hardly hesitated at all and rushed towards Luna. He told her not to panic, that he was there. He also asked her how the baby was, if it was okay. His voice was gentle, with an involuntary tremble, how scared he was that she would get hurt. Even when his arm was scratched, he didn't stop for a second. I could hear the dripping sound. I smelled the nauseating gasoline. I was almost suffocated. The sound of the police siren was getting closer. Blake comforted me. "Don't be afraid, Bonnie. We'll be okay." For a moment, I hoped that the car would explode. I wanted to die in front of him, die in a spectacular way. I wanted him to live the rest of his life with guilt and pain. I wanted him to dream of my dying face whenever he had nightmares at midnight. What a vicious thought. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The firefighters came. There was a look of relief on Blake's face after surviving the disaster. He held me in his arms tightly. It was as if he was afraid that I would disappear if he let go. "Don't be afraid, Bonnie. It's okay. We're all alive. We're all alive." I didn't hug him tightly like I used to. From my perspective, I could see Luna trembling all over. She was terribly scared, but she was still trying her best to comfort the baby in her belly. What did she say to her baby? Did she tell her baby to treat Blake, the savior, well in the future? I said softly. "Luna is also scared." He froze. Ineffable pain showed in his eyes. "Sorry, Bonnie. But there's a baby in her belly. It's 2 lives." I murmured, 2 lives. Did he really care about this number or about Luna? I didn't ask. Even if I asked, he wouldn't admit it. He had a stronger sense of responsibility and morality than ordinary people. He wouldn't admit that he had fallen in love with his brother's woman. I'm different from him. I won't deceive myself. I just touched my lower abdomen and said in my heart, "Baby, your father has given up on us. I'm going to give up on you too. I'm pregnant." Blake doesn't know. A few days later, I got a diagnosis of lung cancer. It's in the advanced stage. Blake doesn't know that either. I don't know how long I can live. But it didn't take me long to make a decision. I want to give birth to this child, but reality hit me hard. Except for me, no one cared about the existence of this child. Because of my childhood experiences, it was very difficult for me to get pregnant. I thought it was a gift from heaven. When I got the report last week, I was overjoyed. I couldn't wait to give Blake, who was on a business trip, a surprise. When the call was connected, before I could say anything, he interrupted me. "Bonnie, I just got off the plane. It's very noisy here. We'll talk about it when I get back." I said okay and told him to be careful on the way. All my enthusiasm was suddenly extinguished. I stuffed the report back into my bag, stood by the roadside for a while in the wind, and then took a taxi home. But when I got out of the car, what I saw was, Blake was accompanying Luna to visit a maternity store. Across the street, I saw Luna holding baby clothes in her hand, smiling sweetly. She held the baby clothes in both hands and walked up to Blake. One was blue and the other was pink. Perhaps she was asking whether the baby in her belly was a boy or a girl? Or maybe which one did he hope it would be? Blake didn't choose. He took both. She continued to pick, and he followed behind carrying things. They looked like a real couple. How happy. How sweet. How eagerly they were looking forward to the arrival of this child. I was stunned. My hand holding the bag couldn't stop shaking. Luna suddenly looked up and saw me from a distance. Somehow, instead, I felt like a child who had done something wrong and quickly hid behind a bus stop sign. I squatted in the cold wind for a long time. When did I realize that Blake didn't love me that much? It was after Luna, with her big belly, moved to the next door to us. It was one night when there was thunder, and I subconsciously snuggled into his arms, but he pushed me away in his sleep. It was that although he wasn't good at expressing himself, he tried his best to make Luna happy. They always had so many memories, so many pasts that I hadn't been a part of. He said he regarded her as his sister. Was it true? A sister without blood relationship. Those scenes that I had deliberately ignored were now becoming clearer and clearer. They brutally and savagely exposed my self-deception. After crying enough, I was about to wipe away my tears and get up when suddenly a white rabbit creamy candy appeared in front of me. Sister, I'll treat you to some candy. Mom said that when you're unhappy, eating candy will make you happy. My tears flowed even more fiercely. I accepted the little girl's candy. It was so fragrant and soft, as if it could sweeten one's heart. I wandered outside for a long time. I didn't go home until my eyes weren't red anymore. Blake had just taken a shower, and his hair was slightly wet. Why are you back so late? I just took a stroll. He had always been taciturn and didn't ask in detail. He just silently put my hands into his arms and muttered, "It's cold outside. Wear more clothes next time when you go out." He asked me to wait for him. After this period of time, he would give me a grand wedding. When he said that, there was a glint in his eyes. Blake seldom broke his promises. At that moment, I was sure that he loved me. But how much did he love me? I didn't know. I wouldn't ask. I just said, "Why not now?" He sighed, helpless and melancholy. "Bonnie, this project is very important to me." He was a workaholic. Most things could give way to work. Including me. I wanted to ask him, what if I'm pregnant? If I was pregnant, could we get married earlier? Looking at his tired expression, I didn't ask this question after all. I had never liked to make things difficult for him. His world was too vast. It was completely different from mine. Who can possess Mount Fuji just because of love? He noticed my disappointment and then took out a small gift box. Inside were a pair of beautiful pearl earrings, like little light bulbs, round and shiny. Such romance didn't happen often. I smiled and accepted them. A few days later, I got another cancer diagnosis report. It turned out that God had never been kind to me. It gave me hope and then brutally plunged me into despair. I sat in the hospital corridor for a long time. I picked up my mobile phone and then put it down again. In the end, I still didn't dial Blake's number. He might be in a meeting. He was always so busy. I could make my own decision. That was the second time I refused to resign myself to fate. The first time, Blake held my hand and told me to keep running. He said, "Beyond this mountain, a brand new future awaits us. There would be candies, rainbows, and new parents." I believed him and rushed forward with all my might. He didn't lie to me. And this time, I was going to give birth to this child. I admit that I was taking a gamble. Some secret expectations rose in my heart. Blake was looking forward to the birth of Luna's child so much. If I had a child, would he love our child as much? It seemed that I had some bargaining chips in my hand, which enabled me to compete with Luna. It was only after the car accident that I realized how ridiculous this idea was. I couldn't compete. I lost completely. A child who isn't loved shouldn't come into this world to suffer. Blake bought some rice noodle rolls and came back. I didn't want to eat them, but he patiently coaxed me. Sure enough, one's temper gets worse after getting pregnant. He picked up a bit of the rice noodle roll and fed it to my mouth. There was some barely noticeable vulnerability and supplication in his expression. I forced myself to eat a little bit despite the nausea and asked him rather unreasonably, "What if I died in the car?" His eyebrows furrowed again. I seldom threw such tantrums. "There's no what if. What if there was?" He was silent for a long time. So long that I thought he wouldn't answer, and then he said, "I would accompany you." Liar. He couldn't bear to. As long as Luna hadn't given birth to that child, he would stay by her side every minute. Blake said with certainty again, "I would accompany you." Was he trying to convince himself? He clearly couldn't bear to die. He wouldn't accompany me. He wasn't alone like me. He still had a mother waiting for him. Compared with them, I was nothing. I had a very long dream. When people are frustrated in reality, they tend to seek comfort in dreams and memories. The first time I met Blake was in a pigsty. The fair and clean young man, at first glance, you could tell that he didn't belong here. Unlike the other crying children, he had a calmness beyond his age. The villagers picked and chose, and in the end, only he was left in the pigsty that he was too old and couldn't be tamed. I heard from my father that he would have his legs broken and be sent to beg in big cities. I relayed this to Blake. He asked me if I wanted to escape from here with him. Without me, he didn't know the way and couldn't escape at all. He said, "You, like us, were also abducted." I subconsciously wanted to deny it. He stared at the scar on my arm and hit the nail on the head. How could there be parents who don't love their own children? He told me how vast the outside world was. He told me how parents should treat their children. He painted a wonderful picture for me about the future and the world. He said, "As long as we escape, a new life will be waiting for us." I was tempted. The day before we implemented the escape plan, my father got drunk again. Compared to his fists, I was more afraid of him tearing my clothes. I begged him to stop. He didn't listen to me. A slap landed on my face, and I was stunned. "I told you. If you don't listen, get out and feed the wolves." I kept trembling. It seemed that something was blocking my throat, making me unable to make a sound. I touched a pair of scissors. I stabbed them hard into his neck. Warm, fishy sweet liquid. A sea of scarlet. I froze on the spot. "Don't look." Blake somehow broke free from the ropes. At the moment when my world was collapsing, he covered my eyes. He deserved it. "You're not wrong. You got justice for yourself and those children." He shook my shoulders, asking me to pull myself together. Only then did I wake up as if from a dream. The plan had to be advanced. I changed my clothes and escaped into the darkness with Blake. The day broke and then darkened again. When the last ray of the setting sun disappeared on the horizon, we ran onto the highway. And our fates were changed. After coming back home from the hospital, I became very sleepy. The illness made me listless. And Blake was getting busier and busier, always on business trips and spending less and less time at home. That was okay. He didn't notice that something was wrong with me. The day before my birthday, Blake rushed back from another city. Actually, I seldom celebrated my birthday. When I was in the mountains, nobody cared about it. For a girl, it was just that she grew 1 year older and was one step closer to the day of being sold. What's more, nobody knew on which day I was born. Later, when I returned home, my biological parents always forgot about it too. They were devoted to their work and my younger brother and didn't care much about me. So I simply didn't celebrate my birthday anymore. It was rather boring. Blake didn't lie to me. The outside world was colorful and vast, and I was indeed abducted, but there was one thing he was wrong about. There really were parents who didn't love their own children. I was abandoned by my biological parents. They had my younger brother, and I was a burden. If it hadn't been for my grandmother, they would never have taken me home. They didn't love me. I thought it didn't matter. In that case, I just wouldn't love them. Nobody owed anybody anything. The door opened. Blake stood outside. Snowflakes fell on his eyebrows, making him look a bit cold. I bumped into a bunch of roses. Then he hugged me. The cancer cells had already metastasized to my bones. He hugged me too tightly. My ribs hurt. "Bonnie, I missed you so much." His warm breath blew into my neck, causing a shiver. He smiled and kissed my face. The touch was cold. But it was affectionate and gentle enough. I don't know how long it took before he let go of me. I turned around and inserted the roses into the vase one by one. Tomorrow is my birthday. Today was nothing special. There was no need to buy these things. Besides, I didn't like roses. It was a pity that it was hard to buy sunflowers in winter. Yeah, I know. The vase has been empty recently. It was quite something that he could even notice such details. I didn't like buying flowers anymore. They wouldn't stay bright for long. It always reminded me of my own life. It seemed that withering and decaying could happen in an instant. Blake hugged me from behind, put his chin on my shoulder, and sighed, "Bonnie, you seem to have lost weight." Recently, whenever he came back, he liked to stick to me. We both tacitly stopped talking about that car accident, but some scars wouldn't disappear just because we didn't mention or look at them. There was a voice in my mind that constantly reminded me, look, this man says he loves you, but in fact, what he cares about most is someone else's life or death. How ironic. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by a sudden clap of thunder. My heart skipped a beat. I subconsciously moved to the side. There was nobody there. The quilt was already cold. Blake had left I don't know how long ago. My mobile phone was being charged in the living room. After hesitating for a while, I summoned up the courage and walked to the living room. The call got through. I asked him where he was. His voice was a bit hoarse. At the hospital. Luna suddenly had a stomachache. My heart sank. Suddenly, I felt very suffocated. On the other end of the phone, Luna was calling him, her voice anxious. And Blake here also became anxious. Bonnie, go to sleep first. I'll be back soon. Before I could say anything, there was a busy signal on the phone. This was the second time he had abandoned me. I glanced at the clock. The hour hand had passed 12. My birthday had arrived. Outside the window lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, but suddenly I wasn't that scared anymore. Anyway, I was going to die, wasn't I? That night I was torn between dreams and reality again and again. I fell asleep in a fluster and woke up in a fluster. A chill rushed from the soles of my feet straight to my heart. I looked around. It was pitch black, as if I was the only one left in the world. The warm air filling the room was torn open. I huddled in the corner of the sofa. When I sensed the movement, I woke up with a start. Blake was back. Why are you sleeping here? His face looked a bit haggard. Probably he hadn't slept all night. I said softly, there was thunder last night. He froze. The knuckles gripping the doorknob suddenly turned white. I was most afraid of thunder. Thunder would remind me of many things. For example, the rainy night when we escaped more than 10 years ago. For example, the red fountain. Blake couldn't be unaware of what I was really afraid of. The law judged me not guilty, but I always felt that I wasn't really innocent. That was the nightmare of my whole life. My current situation might be retribution. A belated retribution. He pursed his lips and his voice was slow and heavy. Bonnie, I'm sorry. I looked up at him and smiled gently. It's okay. It's just thunder. It won't kill anyone. When he was guarding Luna in the hospital, was there ever a moment when he was worried about me? I clenched my fists to suppress the urge to ask. Don't ask. Don't ask. If I asked, I would only be humiliating myself. Blake was silent and walked up to me. His hands were very cold. I shrank back from the cold. He paused for a moment and his jaw tightened. Like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. His eyes were deep and there was a fleeting look of loss on his face. He said, Bonnie, happy birthday. I will accompany you on every birthday in the future. What sweet words. Fool. I won't be able to celebrate my next birthday. Suddenly, he got down on one knee. Marry me, Bonnie. I was stunned. It turned out to be like this. Once upon a time, I had been looking forward to this moment so much. I had dreamed of marrying him. But now I just wanted to laugh. He had asked me to wait. Why didn't he want to wait anymore? It was just like giving me a slap and then a candy. A mean thought popped up. I wanted him to experience my loss and pain too. I said yes, I would. He seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. There were tears in his eyes as he put the ring on my finger. He hugged me and called my name over and over again. I asked him, Blake, do you like children very much? His expression changed. We don't have to have children. He knew that it was difficult for me to get pregnant. Bonnie, having you is enough for me. Actually, he seldom said such mushy words. Now he said them just to make me happy. The happiness at this moment was like a bubble in the sunlight. It would burst with just a poke. It couldn't withstand any storms at all. After my birthday, Blake went on a long trip again. He said he would come back when it was time to register for marriage. In the past, he didn't like to trouble me. But this time, contrary to his usual habit, he asked me to take him to the airport. Before leaving, he was wearing the red scarf I gave him. I knitted that scarf stitch by stitch when we just got together. My fingers were really not that dexterous. I knitted 5 scarves in total and finally picked the nicest one to give to him, but it still looked ugly. So Blake had never worn it before. I watched him walk towards the security check. Halfway there, he suddenly dropped his luggage, turned around and ran back to hug me. He was like an impulsive young lad. The passers-by were snickering as Blake buried his face in my neck and took a deep breath. His eyes were full of reluctance and his voice was a bit muffled. Wait for me to come back at home. Call me if anything happens. This was probably the last time he hugged me. Next time we meet, we won't be so friendly. He asked me to take good care of myself and visit Luna occasionally. I said yes. I picked a suitable day to register for marriage, which was Blake's birthday. I wanted to give him a gift. Before that, I went to see Blake's mother. After all, I should let the child see his grandma. Blake's mother now lives in a nursing home. She's very confused and always needs to be accompanied by a caregiver. After Blake was abducted back then, his parents spent all their family property and posted missing person notices everywhere. They almost traveled all over China. They were cheated many times. The last time, his father snatched back the last sum of money from the swindlers but was stabbed to death. His mother couldn't bear the blow and went crazy ever since. Blake had a very difficult journey of growing up. Of course, my situation wasn't that good either. Actually, sometimes I could understand Blake. When he was with Luna, what he thought of was the carefree time in his childhood. When he was with me, there was only hardship. Just like me. When I was sad, I would always think of running hand in hand with him in the mountains and forests. Every time I fell into the rut of fate, I would think of him. So even though I hit walls everywhere, I still struggled to move forward. He once taught me to be brave. Blake's mother looked in good spirits. It had been cloudy in City S for many days and it finally cleared up today. I pushed her wheelchair and took her out to get some fresh air. I fed her food. She was very well behaved, like an obedient kitten. Luna, where's my grandchild? What about the grandchild in your belly? She was very puzzled. I didn't know what to say. She knocked over the lunchbox and started crying and making a fuss. But I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cellar. The caregiver quickly came over and kept comforting her. The grandchild is here. The grandchild is still here. Your daughter-in-law will come to see you. She stared at me hatefully. Her eyes were like knives, cutting me painfully. Are you this bad woman who took away my daughter-in-law and grandchild? Where's my son? Where did my son go? Let him bring Luna and the grandchild back. I couldn't breathe and the pain in my chest became more and more obvious. It was like there was some invisible force pounding on my chest. Again and again, making a noisy and irritating sound. My head was in a mess. One question after another popped up. Did Blake bring Luna here? What on earth was he planning to do? What was I to him? Whose was the child in Luna's belly? In the past few months, I had never seen the father of the child. They said he was a sailor and would be away for a long time once he went on a long trip. I couldn't help wondering if the person they mentioned really existed. Suddenly, I remembered that when Luna first came here, she was pregnant. I was so envious. So I asked Blake, what if I can't have children in my life? He comforted me, it doesn't matter. Luna and them will live next door to us in the future. We can regard their child as our own. How could he think that I would love Luna's child as much as he did? The trust one had in him before seemed so ridiculous now. I was really tired. I didn't want to ask anymore. I knew very well that even if he said the child wasn't his, I wouldn't believe him anymore. Bonnie, why aren't you at home? I went back to my parents' home. Blake was silent for a while. That he knew that I didn't have a good relationship with my parents. After my grandmother passed away, I had never gone back home. Over the years, I had given most of the money I saved from work to them. It was like paying them back for raising me. Now that I think about it, I've almost paid it all back. We don't owe each other anything. I said, I have to tell them about the wedding. Then I'll go with you. I interrupted him, no need. You just got back. Have a good rest at home. I'll see you at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow. Okay. After hanging up the call, I turned off my mobile phone. I lied to him. I didn't go home at all. After coming out of the nursing home, I went to have an operation. These days, I had been recuperating in the rental house. Soon, it was the next day, Blake's birthday. I was lying in bed, feeling drowsy. Sometimes time passes quickly, and sometimes it passes slowly. I bought a lot of painkillers and took one when I felt pain. The sky was getting darker bit by bit. He should have already found out by now, the pregnancy test report that I hid in the household register. How long had he been waiting at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau? Was it as long as he waited on my birthday? When the last ray of the setting sun was swallowed up, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. It was Blake. He came so quickly. I thought it would take him a few days to find me. He didn't ask me why I lied to him. He just hugged me tightly, as if he wanted to merge me into his bones and blood. He hugged me so tightly that I could hardly breathe. He said, "Bonnie, I'm going to be a father." What was he doing? Was he deceiving himself? I looked up at him with a cruel gentleness in my tone. "You're too late." His eyes widened, like a deflated ball. The joy he had just now disappeared completely. Confusion, fear, pain. All kinds of emotions intertwined on his face. He had never been like this before. Even on that rainy night more than 10 years ago when we almost slipped to the bottom of the cliff, he had never had such a panicked look. I stared at him and said softly, "I aborted the child." He seemed to have received the cruelest judgment. He couldn't stop trembling. His reaction was really beyond my expectation. I thought he would at most be angry and scold me for not discussing it with him. But it wasn't like that. At this moment, I finally confirmed. He had once fantasized about the arrival of our child. He choked and asked me why. He didn't understand. He wanted an explanation. He needs a lot of love, but I can't give it. If my child couldn't get enough love in the future, then why should he be born? I didn't want him to be like me, spending his whole life chasing things he couldn't get. Blake's lips were trembling, and his Adam's apple moved slightly, but he didn't make any sound. All his composure and calmness collapsed at this moment. Suddenly, he covered his eyes, like a young beast on the verge of death, crouched down and burst into wailing. "There's still me, there's still me. How much love can you give? It's not enough, Blake, it's not enough." This was the revenge I planned. But in my heart, I didn't feel any relief. I was holding a knife without a handle in my hand. While stabbing him, I was also bleeding profusely. I was as sad as he was. I was even sadder than he was. No one was more looking forward to the arrival of this child than I was. If only I hadn't got sick. In that case, it wouldn't matter if Blake didn't love him. I would give him the best love. Unfortunately, there's no if. God didn't give me the chance. I pulled the corners of my lips. "It doesn't matter. You still have Luna's child." He looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. His lips were tightly pursed. For a moment, I felt really cruel. I was rubbing salt into his wounds. "If you want, many people will be willing to have children for you." He didn't understand. The resentment in his eyes became more and more obvious. This was the first time he showed such emotions towards me. Suddenly, I felt sad. Why did it turn out like this? We clearly loved each other so much before. Blake looked at me with red eyes, having a silent confrontation with me. The air suddenly became heavy and stagnant. The painkillers seemed to have lost their effect. I felt pain all over my body. It hurt even to breathe. It was like someone was hitting me with a hammer, driving nails into my chest and lower abdomen one by one. Blake was the first to give up and admit defeat. "Bonnie, it's not like this. We don't have to have a child. It's not like this. Believe me." "I don't believe it. Not at all. It's not like this. Why did it turn out like this?" He was almost incoherent. I said softly, "Blake, you should ask yourself." He almost begged, "I owe them this. I can explain, but not now. Bonnie, please, wait for me, okay? I can't wait anymore. I'm dying." I saw my own appearance in his eyes. Depressed and withered. It didn't look good at all. Suddenly, I felt extremely tired. Resentment and unwillingness didn't matter at all at this moment. "Let me go, Blake. I'm so tired. I don't love you anymore." He stared at me blankly. It was as if he had aged instantly. Once he was so strong, but now he was so fragile that he cried like a child. I gave the ring back to him. I had looked at it over and over again these days. After all, I was a bit reluctant to part with it. But I had lost so much weight that I couldn't even wear the ring. This ring should be returned to the person who needed it. Bonnie, you're so cruel to me. I smiled and said yes. He left. Hunched over, not looking decent at all. I stood by the window and said softly to his back, Blake, happy birthday. I looked up into the distance. Among the countless lights of thousands of households, none of them belonged to me. I remembered that a long, long time ago, I asked him, Blake, if one day you knew you had a terminal illness, what would you do? What a silly question. Say goodbye to the people I love, travel around, see the sceneries I haven't seen before, and meet the people I haven't met before. I didn't understand, why say goodbye to the people you love? He just smiled and didn't say anything. Now I know. It's to leave your best appearance in the memories. My words became a prophecy. It's just that our memories weren't that good. And it was me who did these things instead. Sometimes, I really hope that I had never walked out of that mountain forest. If I hadn't seen the outside world, if I had never felt warmth and love, I wouldn't have spent my whole life longing for and chasing things that I couldn't get. Forget it, forget it. In my whole life, I've also glimpsed a ray of light. It's not too bad. Goodbye, my dearest one.